yield to somebody that knows a lot about fiscal control and responsibility. He was the treasurer of the great state of Kansas. My good friend and colleague on Ways and Means, Mr. Ron Estes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to my fellow committee members and so many staff members for the work that went into this budget proposal. Well, I think it's worth pausing to acknowledge what this budget represents. With this budget, we've shown that it's possible to craft a budget that puts us on the road to balanced budget without compromising any essential programs like Social Security, Medicare, veteran funding, defense funding, and agriculture funding. In fact, changes we've proposed in this budget will streamline and safeguard these and other programs, saving money and better serving constituents. And serving our constituents is what it's really all about. My constituents in the 4th District of Kansas know that our nation cannot sustain an unfettered spending spree and that the current national debt is hurting the economy and ultimately their pocketbooks. My office regularly polls constituents in Kansas to ask about their top priorities. In the most recent surveys, federal spending and debt has moved up to the second highest concern among Kansas, right behind rising prices and inflation. As it stands now, the United States borrows $1 out of $5 we spend. Let me say that again. 1 out of every $5 that's spent this year is borrowed. And under President Biden's proposal, it will become 1 out of every $4. And the projections estimated by 2028, payments on interest alone will exceed our entire defense budget, more than $1 trillion. This is completely unsustainable. In spite of this data, President Biden wants to increase our debt by $17 trillion over the next 10 years. At the same time, he tries to claim that his proposal cuts the deficit by $3 trillion, even though his plan includes annual deficit increases. Here's how his proposal breaks down. Over the next 10 years, we would spend $82 trillion and bring in $65 trillion, which means we'll borrow $17 trillion more dollars, on top of the $33 trillion that's already in the national debt. But because that's not $20 trillion in borrowing, President Biden claims he's cutting the deficit by $3 trillion. Only in Washington would this level of spending be considered a cut. Instead, as our proposed budget does, we need to make real cuts that eliminate waste, abuse, and special handouts, like rescinding $71 billion in funding for 87,000 new IRS agents, and repealing $129 billion in green corporate tax breaks. It's important to remember that it took decades of recklessness to get us into this dire debt. So we'll take some time to right the ship. Spending spiked during COVID in what should have been a temporary adjustment to address an immediate challenge, yet my colleagues on the left have made that massive spending their new normal, accelerating our exploding deficit and quickly moved us past the $33 trillion debt limit. But this budget shows how little by little, we can start making important changes that will put us on the road back to fiscal stability, helping our economy now and in the long run. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.